On December 20th, 1968, Betty Lou Jansen, 16, and David Arthur Faraday, 17, were dating in a car in a desolate parking area on Lake Herman Road in California. Shortly afterwards, Stella Borges, a local resident, discovered them both dead and drenched in blood. After the police arrived, there was no evidence of robbery or sexual abuse at the scene. So what happened? Who killed them both? It was the first recorded murder perpetrated by a man dubbed as the Zodiac, one of the most mysterious killers in the history of the United States. The second murder was that of Darlene Elizabeth Ferrin, 22, and Mike Renaud Majot, 19. The attack took place on July 5, 1969, at 12:10 a.m. at the parking lot of the barren Blue Rock Springs Park in the eastern suburbs of Vallejo, California. Darlene is actually married, thereby when the murder occurred, Mike, who was with her, was not the first suspect because Mike was also attacked. The first suspect was Darlene's husband at the time, Dean Ferrin. However, when the investigation began, Dean had an alibi. At that hour, he was working as a chef at his workplace. Mike, a survivor of the attack, testified that a light brown Ford Mustang or Chevrolet pulled into the parking lot just a few meters away from their car. When the man came out of the car, shining a flashlight and approaching the car, Mike and Darlene assumed it was the police, so they did not suspect anything and simply prepared their ID cards. Tragically, the man they assumed was a police officer opened fire on Mike and Darlene without warning. After 5 shots were fired, the man returned to his car. Mike was still alive at the time, shrieking in pain, causing the man to return and fire 4 more shots. Mike saw the perpetrator more clearly at that moment. The man who attacked him was a white man, approximately 5.8 feet tall, in his late 20s or early 30s, with a stocky build, a round face, and brown hair. Even though they looked at each other, there was no conversation between Mike and the perpetrator. Around 45 minutes later, an unidentified man called the Vallejo Police Department and claimed responsibility for the assault that killed Darlene. This man spoke with police in order to correctly identify the weapon used in the attack, which was a 9mm pistol.
Vallejo Police Department.
I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, a public park, you'll find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye.
And he appended a confession to being responsible for the murder of David and Betty the previous year, even precisely revealing details that the public had never known about the murder. A few weeks later, the investigation to discover the man gave no results, and the situation became much more suspenseful when the killer of David, Betty, and Darlene sent letters to various news agencies on July 31st, 1969. The letter contained details known only to the killer, and each letter also contained a cipher that presumably, if cracked, would reveal the killer's identity. He had not yet referred to himself as Zodiac at the time, but this was the start of a letter that he would continue to send for more than 5 years, mocking and making fun of the police who failed to find him. Next is the assault of Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22, and Brian Calvin Hartnell, 20, an attack that occurred on September 27, 1969, at approximately 6:15 p.m. on the shores of Lake Berryessa near Napa County, California. This onslaught felt more violent than before. Cecilia was slain after being stabbed 10 times in the torso, 5 in the front, and 5 in the back. Brian was stabbed 6 times in the back, and no robbery or sexual assault appears to have occurred. They were having a picnic by the lake at the time of the assault. Cecilia noticed a man approaching them, dressed strangely and wielding a gun. The man, around 5 feet tall, claimed to be an escaped prisoner in need of money and a car to escape to Mexico. Brian offered his money and car keys, but the man refused to accept them. The man then tied Cecilia and Brian with a clothesline and savagely stabbed them. Brian was attacked first and then Cecilia. A few minutes later, a fisherman near the scene heard the couple screaming and alerted the park rangers. The ambulance took over an hour to arrive. While both victims were already in severe condition, Just over an hour later, the Napa Police Department got a call from a man claiming responsibility for the attack.
Napa Police Department. I want to report a murder. No. A double murder. They're 2 miles north of Parking headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carbon E. I'm the one that did it.
The call was swiftly traced and found to have originated from a payphone in downtown Napa, and his fingerprints were later discovered on the receiver. Police investigating the crime scene later discovered that the perpetrator had left a written message on the victim's car door, which included the date of the previous victim's attacks. He also marked his message with an unusual symbol in the form of an outline circle. The investigation of the scene also revealed tire tracks, indicating that the killer had parked behind the victim's car. Then, there were the wing walker shoe prints, which indicated that the perpetrator weighed more than 210 pounds. Detectives who interviewed residents in the neighborhood also received from 3 young women who stated they saw a strange man in the vicinity a few hours before the attack. Despite having a large amount of evidence that may have led them to the perpetrator, unfortunately, the investigation did not make much progress. On the other hand, Cecilia died after 48 hours of the attack, although Brian survived and recovered from his condition.
Through the whole thing, like I mentioned before, at the beginning, I did think I was going to die. And so from that moment on, one has to have certain goals that you have to set. The first goal, of course, was to live.
Early last Saturday evening, Celia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, both in their early 20s, were sitting on this knoll of land overlooking part of Lake Berryessa. They thought they were alone.
This case also led to many serial killer suspects being investigated, including Ted Bundy. However, Ted Bundy's fingerprints did not match those discovered. Despite having fingerprint evidence, police are still unable to find the Zodiac. The killer, who was still on the loose, claimed another victim. This time, the target was Paulie Stein, a taxi driver aged 29 at the time. He was attacked on October 11, 1969, and died on the spot at approximately 9:55 p.m. The attack took place at Presidio Heights, San Francisco, California. Paul was shot once in the head from close range. The perpetrator used a semi-automatic pistol caliber 9mm. However, it was discovered that the gun used to kill Darlene was not the same. The police investigation and reconstruction revealed that Paul's taxi was on its way to Washington and Maple Streets with a passenger presumed to be Zodiac. However, upon arrival at the destination, the passenger requested a stop at Washington and Cherry Streets, which is 1 block away from the initial destination. It is unknown why the passenger altered his destination. Paul's wallet and keys were stolen, and most of his clothing was ripped off. Blood-stained fingerprints, probably belonging to the suspect, were also found in the vehicle. The 3 witnesses, who saw the suspect from a distance of about 60 feet, testified about the perpetrator's physical characteristics, which were described as a white man about 25 or 30 years old, 5.8 feet tall, stocky build, reddish-brown hair with a cropped cut, thick-rimmed glasses, and dark-colored clothes. The witnesses last saw him walking north, but because the police officer misidentified the suspect as a black adult man, the patrol officer who passed him was unable to stop and identify him as the perpetrator of the incident. Paul's murder was initially assumed to be a typical taxi driver murder, a hideous robbery. However, when the San Francisco Chronicle media received a letter from the Zodiac on October 13, 1969, the situation altered. The letter included a portion of Paul's bloody shirt, and he proudly declared his murder. San Francisco police inspectors Dave Tashi and Bill Armstrong formally confirmed that the piece of clothes belonged to Paul, and they worked with witnesses to sketch the perpetrator. Police artists were able to sketch it more clearly, and the distribution included a more accurate sketch than in the previous case. In addition to the previous victims, there are 2 other suspected victims, including Ray Davis, 27, who was discovered dead in his own taxi on April 10, 1962, after being shot twice. Then there was Sherry Jo Bates, 18, who was discovered dead on October 30th, 1966, after being battered and stabbed repeatedly with a short-edged knife. However, the Zodiac never mentions this in its letters. Thus, it is questionable whether this case is likewise his doing. The Zodiac Killer is more than simply a serial killer who likes taunting the police. He is also someone who appears to be incredibly intelligent and bored with ordinary killings. So he engages in unusual behavior to attain his murderous satisfaction. His true identity has never been revealed, even after decades have gone. The name of the Zodiac was invented by himself in a series of letters and taunting cards addressed to local San Francisco newspapers, in which he threatened to carry out major murders and bombs if it was not publicized. Some of the letters he sent had cryptograms that, if cracked, allegedly revealed his true identity. Zodiac also claimed in his letters that he purposely killed his victims so that they may be used as slaves in the afterlife. He admitted to committing 37 murders, but the identities of the others were not revealed. Furthermore, in 2020, after decades had passed, a cryptographer named David Arthur cracked the cipher sent by the Zodiac. But unfortunately, the cipher ultimately did not provide any clues. Although numerous theories regarding the identity of the Zodiac have been discussed, only one suspect has ever been publicly identified: Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher in California and convicted sex offender who died in 1992. Arthur Lee Allen's involvement with the Zodiac Killer began on October 30th, 1966, when Sherry Jo Bates was discovered stabbed to death in Riverside, California. In late November 1966, police and local newspapers received 2 letters, including an anonymous typed confession to Sherry's murder. Based on the letter, the typewriter was a Royal Type Elite, or Pica model. While Arthur was known to work as an elementary school teacher in Riverside, he was absent from teaching on November 1st, 1966, leading the police to suspect that he was hiding due to wounds caused by his victim's resistance. When he was suspected and searched, it was discovered that he used a Royal typewriter of the Elite type. Some suspicions continue to point to Arthur, since some letters appear to be connected to him, including some unusual codes discovered in letters, one of which is a symbol that resembles the letter Z and may also resemble the number 32. Arthur was 32 years old when Sherry was murdered, and his permanent address was likewise 32. According to his friends and family, Arthur also had some strange, unnatural behaviors, macabre thoughts and speech that seemed suspicious. Arthur had a watch with the Zodiac logo in the shape of a crossed circle, the same symbol used by the Zodiac Killer. Arthur's friend also claimed that Arthur once discussed a dreadful thing that he termed the idea of a novel he was going to write, which was to murder random couples. Then he taunts the police with letters detailing his crimes, each marked with the same symbol as the one on his watch and naming himself the Zodiac. The police accepted this confession and searched Arthur's trailer home, but unfortunately, they could not uncover anything that may incriminate him on the accusations. However, the more they investigated Arthur, the more it was revealed that he had many horrible thoughts, including the idea of hunting humans for enjoyment. Later the following day, another search revealed that Arthur possessed the same type of handgun ammunition used by the Zodiac Killer to murder victims on Lake Herman Road. Coupled with Mike's statement as a survivor of the attack, who identified the perpetrator through physical characteristics, and the car he was driving pointed to Arthur. Later on, in the middle of 1992, Mike chose Arthur's photo from a collection of suspect photos, claiming that Arthur had shot him. Brian, one of the survivors, identified Arthur as the one who attacked him. He identified Arthur's physical look and voice as being similar to the Zodiac. At the crime scene, traces of a size 10.5 shoe were recovered, and Arthur was wearing the same size. However, Arthur was never tried in court because he was never directly proven of murder until his death on August 26, 1992, at the age of 58 due to diabetes and heart problems. Besides Arthur's name, there are actually 3 other names suspected by the police, which are Richard Gaikowski, Rick Marshall, and Lawrence Klein. Richard is a journalist and editor-in-chief of the Good Times newspaper in San Francisco, who is accused of being involved in the murder. Even some of his closest associates identify as Zodiacs based on his behavior, and handwriting has the same characteristics as letters made by Zodiac. The California Department of Justice has likewise established that Richard's handwriting is precisely the same consistency as Zodiac handwriting. Unfortunately, the investigation into Richard met numerous dead ends. Moreover, plenty of documents about him from the past had been destroyed. Therefore, there was no sufficient evidence to arrest or search him, so the investigation was ended. Meanwhile, Rick Marshall was suspected of making suspicious comments on his radio frequency in 1976, which led to his name being added to the suspect list, although there was insufficient evidence to indicate that he was a Zodiac killer wanted by the police. On the other hand, another possibility is Lawrence Klein, who has a lengthy criminal record dating back to 1940. Darlene Ferrin's sister, Pam Huckabee, claims Lawrence followed her for months before her murder. However, until his death on May 20th, 2010, there was no solid evidence to indicate Lawrence was the Zodiac killer. However, suspicions remained strong against him. In the end, the Zodiac killer was never apprehended or revealed. The Zodiac killer is still one of the most mysterious killers in U.S. history.